Retirement exposes a truth that working life lets many people postpone. During your working years, you can get away with a surprising amount of structural sloppiness. You can invest badly and still recover, because new earnings keep arriving. You can ignore taxes and still keep moving, because salaries and bonuses paper over the waist. You can carry too little cash, too much confidence, too much concentration, and too little thought about fragility. And for a while, the machine still runs because labor is pouring fuel into it every month. Retirement changes the nature of the machine. Now the engine is no longer your labor. Now the engine is your structure. That is why so many people who looked financially respectable at 60 end up feeling strangely fragile at 70. They thought retirement would mostly be about return. What they discover instead is that retirement is about control. Control over legal surprises, control over cash flow, control over sequence risk, control over housing, control over the body itself. If you lose enough of those forms of control, the portfolio can still look respectable on paper while your life becomes smaller, tighter, and more reactive than you ever expected. That is why I do not begin retirement planning with stock picks. I do not even begin with asset allocation. In the narrow sense people usually mean I begin with structural assets. Not because I dislike growth. I have spent my life chasing growth where it was sensible, but because retirement success is defined less by brilliance than by durability. If you want to understand retirement properly, you must first stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, how do I maximize return next year? That is not the governing question anymore. The governing question is, what must I put in place so that the next 30 years feel calm, flexible, and survivable? That is a far better question. It is also a more adult one. Adults eventually learn that life is not ruined only by bad markets. Life is ruined by combinations. A lawsuit arriving in the same year as a bad market. A large withdrawal needed in the same year as a recession. A fall in the bathroom arriving just as the house proves unsuited to aging. A spouse dying after the household claimed Social Security too early. A large tax bill triggered because there was no middle bucket to draw from. A few such combinations and suddenly a retirement that looked perfectly respectable becomes an improvisation exercise. I do not admire improvisation when the stakes are high. I admire design. So if I were retiring today, there are 6 things I would want to buy immediately. Not 6 trades, not 6 stories, 6 forms of durability. The first is legal protection through a serious personal liability umbrella policy. The second is flexibility through a taxable brokerage account. The third is longevity insurance through delaying the larger Social Security benefit. The fourth is time through a retirement runway of stable, accessible assets. The fifth is independence through aging, in-place upgrades to the home. And the sixth is physical durability through direct investment in health span. I want to talk through each of them the way I would think about them if my own peace depended on getting the order right, because in retirement, peace often does depend on getting the order right. The first asset, the umbrella policy, sounds dull enough that many people skip it. That alone should make you suspicious. The public loves skipping the boring things that would have mattered most in the year. They did not expect. By the time a person retires, he usually has something worth protecting. That sentence should be obvious. For some reason it is not. Perhaps it is. Because people think of wealth only in the glamorous sense. They imagine wealth means yachts and rivalries and pages in a glossy magazine. That is childish. A retired couple with a paid-for-home retirement accounts, a taxable brokerage account, and years of careful saving is wealthy enough to attract damage if the wrong legal event enters the room. And unlike the billionaire of fantasy, the ordinary retiree cannot absorb a large judgment casually by selling one of several planes. He has a finite structure. He has one house, one set of accounts, one retirement plan, one reserve of dignity. That structure is precisely why liability matters so much. If you drive, you have liability. If you own a home people visit, you have liability. If you host grandchildren, entertain neighbors, keep a dog, rent a cabin, volunteer, loan a vehicle, or merely exist in a world where bad accidents collide with opportunistic attorneys, you have liability. This is not cynicism. It is arithmetic applied to law. A personal umbrella policy is one of the cheapest serious protections a retiree can buy, for a relatively small annual premium, often absurdly small relative to the asset base it protects. You can add $1 or several million of additional protection over the top of your home and auto insurance. What that really means is that you are purchasing one of my favorite things in finance. A small fixed cost in exchange for protection against a large chaotic cost. I have always preferred fixed costs to chaotic ones. The older you get, the more valuable that trade becomes. Young people sometimes overestimate their ability to recover from surprises. They still have future labor, they still have time, they still have runway in the body and runway in the career. A retiree has less of both. A retiree also often has more visible assets and less appetite for disorder. That is why I think of the umbrella policy not as a mere insurance product but as an asset. It protects the portfolio from becoming unexpectedly available to a claim that should have been transferred for pennies on the dollar long before anyone tripped on the steps. And I want to say something here about the home. A great many retirees still think of the house only as shelter and memory. It is both of those. It is also strategy. The home may be the largest individual asset on the household balance sheet. It may later be downsized. It may form part of a long-term care funding plan. It may be sold to release equity at exactly the point other assets are under pressure. To leave such an asset underinsured is not conservatism. It is negligence wearing a responsible face. I do not care whether the premium feels annoying. Many excellent uses of money feel annoying. That is not a serious standard. The serious standard is whether the expenditure reduces fragility meaningfully. This one does. That is why I buy it first. The second asset is the taxable brokerage account. If the umbrella policy protects the outside of the structure, the taxable brokerage account protects the inside from becoming too rigid. Most retirees arrive with one or two obvious buckets. There is usually a traditional IRA or some rolled over 401k money, that is the pre-tax pool, the one that often becomes the main current income machine. Then there may be Roth money if the household planned well enough or earned cleverly enough or converted deliberately enough during the accumulation years. That Roth money often becomes the long-term growth bucket, the reserve for later life, or the inheritance. Friendly pool. Fine. I like both. But the absent bucket causes enormous hidden strain. That absent bucket is the taxable account. I call it the missing middle, because that is exactly what it is. Without it, a retiree is forced into too blunt a relationship with taxes. Every unusual expense must be shoved either through the pre-tax bucket, where every dollar tends to light up ordinary income, or through the Roth bucket, where many people would prefer to preserve those assets for later compounding or heirs. That is poor architecture. Life does not arrive in smooth monthly checks and modest inflation adjustments alone. Life arrives in lumps: a car, a kitchen, a roof, help for a child, help for a grandchild, a wedding, a large trip, a sudden medical expense, the right chair, the right hearing aids, the right move, the right legal work. A retiree needs a pool that can absorb lumps without turning every one of them into a tax event of the clumsiest kind. That is what the taxable brokerage account does. When you sell from it, you are usually taxed on the gain, not on the entire distribution as ordinary income. That distinction is enormous. Long-term capital gains treatment is often far gentler than the treatment applied to IRA withdrawals. That matters, especially in retirement, when one poorly timed extra withdrawal can have ripple effects across marginal tax brackets, Medicare surcharges, or the taxation of Social Security itself. The public does not think deeply enough about tax choreography in retirement. They think in balances. I think in usable balances after the rules get done taking their bite. A taxable account gives you choreography. It gives you an elegant middle. You can fund a purchase without lighting up too much ordinary income. You can manage gains. You can harvest losses where useful. You can choose which lots to sell. You can shape your taxable picture with more finesse. That is a major asset. I have always disliked financial structures that leave me with only two crude choices, when the real world regularly demands 5 or 6 nuanced ones. The taxable account creates nuance. It is not flashy, and that is one reason it gets ignored. The financial industry tends to market products that produce obvious commissions or obvious narratives. The taxable account produces flexibility. Flexibility is not easily sold because it looks too much like plain common sense. Plain common sense is what I trust most. I would go further. In retirement, a taxable account is often not just useful for large irregular expenses. It is useful psychologically. A person who knows he has a middle bucket tends to feel less cornered. Less cornered people make better decisions. That is one of the oldest truths in finance. Panic is often just cornered thinking. A household with more levers pulls them more calmly. That is another reason I prize this bucket so highly. The third asset is the most controversial in casual conversation, and one of the least controversial in my mind. It is longevity insurance through delaying the larger Social Security benefit. Now, people hear the words delay Social Security and immediately bring their emotional case to the discussion. I paid into it. I want my money. What if I do not live long enough? What if the government changes the rules? What if I want to enjoy retirement while I am young enough? All fair questions. None of them eliminate the structural point. The structural point is that Social Security, especially the larger benefit inside a married household, is not just current income. It is a floor. More than that, it is an inflation-adjusted floor, More than that, it is often the survivor floor that changes the analysis completely. I have always been suspicious of decisions made on a one-year frame when the real consequences stretch 30 years or more. Retirement encourages exactly that mistake because people feel the transition so intensely. They leave work. They want the machine to start paying. They want proof that retirement has begun. The benefit becomes symbolic. Fine. Symbolism is expensive. A larger Social Security check purchased through delay is one of the best longevity hedges most households will ever be offered. Every year of delay between full retirement age and 70 raises the benefit meaningfully, and the larger benefit then rides forward with inflation adjustments. If you are the higher earner in a married couple, that larger check may later become the surviving spouse's check. That is not a minor detail. That is real late life stability purchased through patience. The public likes to say they are maximizing when they claim early. Often they are merely spending a structural advantage before understanding what it was worth. Again, I am not a slogan machine. There are people with poor health, no bridge assets, unusual family circumstances, or other realities that justify a different path. I respect circumstance, but broadly speaking, I think far too many households frame Social Security in terms of how soon can we turn it on instead of what kind of floor do we want protecting the 80s and 90s. That is the better question. The older I get, the more I value floors. Young people worship upside. Older people eventually learn the worth of things that do not require heroism to continue functioning. A larger Social Security benefit is exactly that kind of thing. It is not a speculative move. It is not a market-dependent move. It is a structural move. If you delay intelligently, you are in effect buying longevity insurance with one of the strongest products available in the country. People say, I do not want to delay because I may not live long enough. That is the wrong household frame in many marriages. The right frame is not only what happens if both live long, the right frame includes what happens if one lives much longer than the other. Widowhood is financially and emotionally hard enough. I do not want to make it structurally weaker too. That is why the larger benefit matters so much. I would rather a household think like an insurer here than like a consumer. The fourth asset is the retirement runway. This may be the most behaviorally important of all six, because it directly changes how the retiree experiences market volatility. And the experience matters every bit as much as the theory. A good theory the owner cannot emotionally live with is not a good retirement plan during your working years. A bad market is unpleasant but often not destructive if you keep working and keep contributing. In retirement, the same bad market can become more than unpleasant. It can become a sequence problem. If a retiree must keep selling stocks to pay living expenses while stocks are down hard, he is liquidating future recovery potential at low prices. That can scar a plan very early. Sequence risk is not some academic curiosity. It is what happens when time and withdrawals begin acting together against the retiree at exactly the wrong moment. The runway is how you fight back. I do not mean a tiny emergency reserve. I mean a real intentional reserve of stable assets that can cover years of spending, not weeks of inconvenience, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for some households. Enough so that if the market enters a bad period, the retiree is not forced to turn a temporary decline into a permanent mistake. That is the point. The runway buys time. Time is one of the most valuable assets in all of finance because time lets the underlying structure work while you refrain from doing something stupid. Without a runway, every ugly headline becomes personal. Every decline feels like a threat to next month's grocery money. Every news cycle becomes an invitation to panic. I do not admire that kind of setup. If you are going to retire, you should retire from financial reactivity too, not merely from the office. The runway lets you do that. How it is built matters, but the principle matters more. Money markets, treasury bills, short duration bonds, intermediate bonds. Some households may even benefit from some long duration exposure, despite how disliked that category has become since rates rose. Because diversification in a defensive bucket means you will periodically own things that are currently unloved. That is normal. A properly built runway is not a performance trophy. It is a calm machine. It exists so that next month, spending and next quarter, spending, and often next year, spending are not fully dependent on what equities decide to do during some ugly stretch. That changes everything. Once a retiree has that runway, the portfolio behaves differently because the owner behaves differently. The owner knows he does not have to sell the good assets immediately. He knows he can wait. He knows the market has room to heal without him intervening at a bad price. That is a very high return form of peace. Peace is an underrated return. The younger crowd laughs at that sentence because they still think the game is purely numerical. It is not. A person who stays rational outperforms a person who behaves reactively, even if the second one began with better spreadsheet assumptions. That is why I value the Runway so highly. It does not just protect dollars, it protects decision quality. And decision quality is one of the most important retirement assets I know. The fifth asset is the home itself, but used correctly. By that I mean aging, in-place upgrades. The financial planning world does not talk enough about this because it prefers cleaner abstractions. Housing expense today, long-term care expense later, simple boxes. Real life is much messier and much more human than that. Aging is not usually a trap door, it is a slope. A slippery shower today is a fall risk next year and a forced move 3 years later. Laundry in the basement is manageable at 60 and annoying at 70 and absurd at 80. Poor lighting is tolerable until vision or balance become less forgiving. A bathtub step is nothing until it becomes the difference between autonomy and dependence. That is why I think a retiree who expects to stay in his current home should spend deliberately and early on making the home friendlier to older age. Not as a sad concession, as an asset purchase. A curbless shower is not just a renovation, it is an independence device. Grab bars are not hospital aesthetics. They are stability equipment. The bever handles are not tiny upgrades. They are friction reduction for older hands. Main floor laundry is not a convenience vanity. It is a daily life durability investment. Better lighting is not decoration. It is fall prevention. And every year, a retiree stays safely and comfortably in his own home rather than being pushed prematurely toward institutional living. May represent a remarkable return on modest upfront spending. That is, before we even count the human return. Most people want to remain in familiar surroundings as long as possible. That desire is not sentimental weakness. It is a recognition that home is not merely a structure. It is routine, memory, orientation, dignity, and the maintenance of selfhood. If a few carefully chosen improvements can buy more of that time, then I regard those improvements as highly productive assets. People waste far more money on cosmetic nonsense that adds nothing to their freedom than they would ever spend on modifications that could meaningfully extend independence. That is backwards. I would rather skip the pretty nonsense and buy another year or 3 of functional autonomy. That is a superb trade. There is also a pure financial dimension: assisted living and long term care are not cheap. If a modest investment in the house delays those transitions even a year, the financial savings alone can be huge. The public loves the phrase return on investment when it is attached to something flashy. I think this may be one of the best return on investment calculations available to retirees. It simply does not flatter the ego, which is why it gets neglected. Retirement planning without serious thought about the physical usability of the home is incomplete. The sixth asset is health span. I leave it for last only because most people understand it the least, not because it matters the least. In truth, it may be the most universally important of all. A retirement plan is not a plan for accounts alone. It is a plan for a body moving through time. That body matters. If the body fails faster than necessary, the portfolio is forced to solve problems it was never meant to solve so early. Mobility loss becomes a housing problem. Weakness becomes a care problem. Falls become a liquidity problem. Pain becomes a transportation problem. Loss of muscle becomes an independence problem. That is why I think of health span not as self-improvement vanity, but as core retirement infrastructure. People hear exercise and imagine aesthetics. That is childish. I am not thinking about whether a 70-year-old has visible abdominals. I am thinking about whether he can get up from the floor, carry groceries, climb stairs, react to imbalance, recover from setbacks, and stay out of expensive dependency longer than he otherwise would. That is what strength means in retirement. Strength training, mobility work, preventive care, resistance bands, a kettlebell or two, walking with purpose. A trainer if accountability is needed, a DEXA or body composition scan if it helps measure reality rather than fantasy. None of these are cosmetic indulgences. They are investments in bodily durability, and bodily durability extends financial durability. I have seen too many households focus with obsessive precision on portfolio withdrawal rates, while giving too little thought to the single variable that can radically change all the math, namely whether the body can continue supporting an independent life. A preventable decline in physical capability can become a 5-figure or 6-figure financial issue faster than many market problems do. That is why I would absolutely spend money here early, not recklessly. Not with the delusion that mortality itself can be negotiated, but with the clear understanding that the difference between a strong 76 and a fragile 76 can be partly influenced by action long before that age arrives. The return on that difference is extraordinary. It is financial. Yes, it is also moral. A person owes himself a serious attempt to preserve his own agency if he has the means to do so. That is how I see it. Now, when I step back from these 6 assets, what strikes me most is how unglamorous they are. That is one reason I trust them. The market and the financial industry are always trying to sell retirees excitement at exactly the moment they should be buying sturdiness. A hot fund, a fancy structured note, a concentrated yield play, a tactical income strategy with far more confidence than humility. No thank you. I would rather buy legal protection, tax flexibility, longevity insurance, time, housing, independence, and physical durability. These things do not make people feel brilliant. They make people harder to break. That is better. Retirement should not depend on brilliance. It should depend on good design. And good design means the portfolio is only one part of the structure. The rest is everything around it that keeps the owner from being cornered. If you corner a retiree, he will make bad decisions. He will withdraw at poor times. He will claim benefits at the wrong time. He will panic over headlines. He will neglect the house until the house starts negotiating back. He will spend too little on the body and too much later on the consequences. That is the pattern I want to avoid. So if someone asks me what to buy immediately once you retire, I would say this. Buy protection first. Buy flexibility second. Buy longevity third. Buy time fourth. Buy independence at home fifth. Buy durability in the body sixth. Then let the portfolio do its job inside a structure strong enough to support it. That is how retirement becomes calm rather than brittle. That is how a plan survives not only the market, but life itself. And in the end, that is what matters. A retirement that survives life is worth far more than one that only looked good in a spreadsheet.